All right, we're getting there. Speciation can only occur if populations are separated somehow and reproductive isolation occurs. I think I said to myself like 1 week ago that I was going to work on having really good handwriting in these lectures, like slow down Wendy Riggs and have really good handwriting. Yeah, you can judge my effectiveness. Reproductive isolation must occur. And then there's okay. First of all, is it simple? Is it like, can we watch it happen? Well, we actually can. But can we like look outside and be like, oh, look, speciation is happening? We might be able to, but reproductive isolation is something that we can visualize. And why? Why must reproductive isolation occur? Because if you do not reproductively isolate two populations, then they're going to keep mixing alleles. And you're not, like, whatever, you can have that whole group change, but speciation inside that group cannot happen because their gene pool is all mixed up in there. Their alleles are all together. They're one big blob. For speciation to occur, if you want to start with one species and you want to end up with two species, you're going to have to somehow have reproductive isolation between these two groups to prevent the alleles from mixing. And then that's just part one of it. Reproductive isolation has to occur and then change. There needs to be enough change that, well, sometimes the reproductive isolation happens first, sometimes it happens second over time. But let's look at what some of those forms of reproductive isolation could be. And I guess the thing that I'm thinking of is geographic isolation, because it's the easiest. And in my mind, I'm like, the only way I can understand reproductive isolation occurring, like separation between a population occurring, is if a mountain range erupts in the middle of a population, or a river forms in the middle of a population of critters. And now you have some critters on one side and some critters on the other side. And they're isolated from each other. They're geographically, they cannot cross the river. If they can cross the river, that ain't geographic isolation. If they can hoof it across the mountain, that ain't geographic isolation. It has to actually separate, prevent reproduction in those two groups. Geographic isolation makes sense. It's easy. Throw up a fence between critters. If they can't get through the fence, they can't make babies with each other. Reproductive isolation means you can't make babies with each other. Okay, geographic isolation, straightforward. The next set are not quite so straightforward. And you might think, well, I kind of need geographic isolation to happen first, and then a population can develop these other forms of reproductive isolation if they were to come back together again. You can play with that. This is why it's a little bit tricky, because it's kind of a chicken egg question. What happened first? It's easy to think geographic isolation happens first, and then you can end up with something called temporal isolation. And guess what this is? Temporal. What does temporal make you think of? I don't know, am I a weirdo? It makes me think of time. Critters make babies at different times. Temporal isolation is going to be one group of critters is making babies in the morning and the other group is making babies at night. And they're making babies at different times. So they're not going to make babies with each other. That's a form of isolation. One group makes babies in March. The other one makes babies in June. They're not going to make babies at the same time. So they're not going to make babies with each other. That is temporal isolation. We also can have ecological isolation. Dude, ecological isolation means they live in different places. So, one bug lives at the top of the trees, the other bug lives in the grass. They are ecologically isolated from each other. The critters in the top of the tree aren't ever going to come into contact with the critters in the grass. Therefore, they're not ever going to make babies. That's ecological isolation. Let's see if there are other, that's the exact example I gave in my notes here. So I don't have another example of ecological isolation. I would argue that one of your best ways to deal with this topic would be to come up with your own examples of how do we do these forms of isolation. This is a fun one. Mechanical isolation. What do you think that means? This is an anatomical incompatibility. Oh my gosh, don't make me write incompatibility. That's a incompatibility. Mechanical isolation means the parts don't fit. The penis for one critter does not fit inside the vagina of another. I just have to say this out loud because I can't believe I haven't had the chance to tell you this. There's a species of duck that has, I'm not kidding you, a corkscrew penis. I think lots of ducks have corkscrew penises. The female ducks in that species have corkscrew vaginas. If the corkscrew penis doesn't match the corkscrew vagina, that's a mechanical isolation. That means that they aren't going to be able to make babies because the parts don't fit together. Who knew there were corkscrew penises and vaginas? It's spectacular. Behavioral isolation. Behavioral isolation, I mean, this stuff is so cool. This is like critters. This is critter sex, which if you really are into critter sex, you should take a zoology class because botany is probably all plant sex. Zoology is all animal sex. It's really interesting the different strategies critters have. Behavioral isolation means one critter looks at the other critter and is like, I do not find that attractive. I'm not interested in that. No, thank you. It's actually a behavioral choice. Maybe the parts would fit. Maybe the timing is right. Maybe they live in the same place, but something about it, the smell isn't right, the groove isn't right, the song isn't right, like whatever it is, the behaviors say, I'm actually not into this. We're getting into the nitty-gritty. Gametic isolation. Maybe it works. The parts fit. The behaviors are like, yeah, I'm cool with this. That works for me. But the sperm and egg, it doesn't work. They don't combine. They don't form a gamete. Or if they do form a gamete, the gamete dies. It doesn't work. At the gamete level, we end up with a no-go. You can't make a viable kid. The last one is hybrid inviability. And that's a form of isolation where dude, it all works. We got everything set up and we are effective. The parts fit, the gametes, we get fertilization. We even get kid formation. But that kid either dies or can't make their own babies. What did we talk about that was related to this? We did. Donkeys. Donkeys and horses make mules, and mules are unable to make their own babies. They have 63 chromosomes and they can't make viable babies with anybody. So awesome. They existed. We got a hybrid, but we were not successful and we could not carry on. The hybrid can't make their own babies. If you can't make your own babies, you aren't a species. It doesn't count. These are mechanisms of speciation. We talked through microevolution mechanisms, natural selection, mutation, gene flow, and genetic drift. Those were our 4 ways that we can get change in the gene pool of a population. And now, if those changes are accompanied by reproductive isolation, where we can't make babies with and mix up all our genes together, then we can have speciation take place. We're coming back to hit home the significance of this.